Thank you for joining me. I've been looking forward to this one. As always, I'm going to try to do these every Monday night, 9 p.m. Eastern time. Of course, the topics will just always be up to whatever conversations we have on the channels. The forward stroke is something that's been coming up lately, and I thought it'd be a really great topic to discuss with everybody. And what I really love doing is not only do I like to pass on whatever I can as we talk about them, but also I've been learning so much from all these sessions as well, because other instructors, mentors will join in, and then they'll also give us great information that's extremely helpful. So I put together a couple of topics that all have to do with the forward stroke when it comes to kayaking, and through those, I'll just go through them, and then we can, of course, have any kind of conversation throughout. As always, ask questions. This is a discussion more than anything. I love how they've been going lately, and the input has been really great, so I want to continue doing them. So if you're joining me on YouTube, as always, there is a chat box below. There's a live chat, so that way we can talk real time. And if you're joining me here on Instagram, same thing, you can comment below, and that way this is actually a conversation, which makes it so much better. Hello, thank you for joining me. How's it going? Jesse, I haven't talked to you in forever. Okay, we need to talk outside of this. When are we going to see you? Well, how about you? I haven't seen you in forever. Okay, so let's talk about some paddling. So the idea, the topics I want to cover today are, first, I want to talk just for a second between, not really differences, but really how I focus on either the Euroblade forward stroke and the Greenland paddle. I'd love to discuss a little bit why taking lessons when it comes to the forward stroke could be very helpful. Using your legs and your core and just your body instead of your arms. Keeping your stroke even on both sides. That's always really good. Not wasting energy. So that's usually with bubbles or with lots of noise. And then you could also look at how the blade is in relative to your motion in the water and the kayak, and so that you don't waste energy doing that as well. And then lastly, a good paddle goes a long way. So let's talk about all that stuff. Dani, buenísimo. Un abrazo grande, nos hablamos. Hola, pa. Greetings from Greenland. Hello, thank you for joining me. What is the time difference? Let's see, it's 9 p.m. for me. I am guessing you guys are much, much further forward. I'm not really sure how many hours. If you're joining me on YouTube, as always, there's a live chat below. Please feel free to talk in there. We can talk real time. Hello, High Voltage Climber, Chris. Trabajando al mismo tiempo, pero escuchando. Good. Thank you for joining me, as always, all of you guys. So, Chris, I know we discussed for a second if we were going to talk about Greenland versus Euro. I think actually we should cover that for sure. Regards for Yucatan, Mexico. Gracias por estar conmigo. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to mention. ¿De dónde son? Buenas noches. So many people speaking Spanish. I love it. Thank you for being with me. Gracias por estar. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to mention was my approach on this. And so what I wanted to say is I've been paddling for not an extremely long time, but I've been paddling for a while, and I've worked with a lot of different mentors. I've taken specifically forward stroke classes, a lot of them, because after I took my first one, I realized just how much I didn't know and how much one single lesson helped me make my forward stroke so much better. So ever since then, in almost every workshop I've done, I've always worked with mentors or with instructors to try to learn more about the forward stroke. I mean, We take thousands upon thousands of forward strokes when we're out in the water. Why not make it as efficient as possible so that we can last longer, we can cover more distances, and we're not tiring our body out? And also, why waste energy when we don't need to, right? So, what I wanted to mention before we get into the discussion is that I've been along a certain amount, but every time I go to a workshop, I realize just how much I still don't know. And I also realized that when I take workshops later, I'm learning new things because I already have a base to learn on from previous classes. So my first point is continue taking lessons. Unless you've been doing this all your life, there's always something new you can learn. Every mentor has a different approach to it. Everybody has a different body type. Everybody uses their muscles differently. They have a different kayak. The ratio of their weight to the kayak and proportions are different. So everyone's going to tell you something slightly different. Some of the ideas and concepts kind of carry across everything, but I really recommend, you would be surprised how much you would learn just if you could have someone that really knows what they're doing and has a wonderful forward stroke, either work with them or see if you could take a class, a workshop, a lesson, a weekend paddle with an instructor. Even after you're off the water and you're just chatting, having food, maybe having a beer, you would learn so much that you can then apply. And some of the exercises I've learned from mentors and instructors, I continue working on now, years later, meaning the forward stroke for me a lot of times becomes just, I go into auto mode. I'm not really thinking, and when I do, I start making mistakes, and I realize that I start paddling with my arms only, or I'm not really rotating, or I'm not using my legs. And then I think about all the different classes I've taken, and I try to incorporate those again. So, number one, if you can take some lessons, you will learn so much more than just watching videos or just paddling on your own. Trust me, that will be so beneficial. And then the other thing is that getting that feedback, that instant feedback, is also crucial because a lot of times you're doing something, you're thinking you're doing it, but you're really not. And then if you have an instructor or someone that really knows what they're doing next to you, they can tell you, why don't you try this instead, or this? Or you're just going a little too far behind you with the blade. That does nothing. So if you have someone next to you telling you that, that's instant feedback. The camera, sure, the camera doesn't lie, so you can see some of that stuff. But working with someone that knows what they're doing is going to increase your efficiency for your forward stroke tremendously. So I highly, highly recommend that. As always, if you're just joining on YouTube, please feel free to type into the live chat below. So this is supposed to be a discussion, so questions are always welcome. Same thing goes on here on Instagram. Okay, let's move on. So another thing I want to talk about for a little bit was the Euroblade forward stroke versus the Greenland paddle. I've taken many lessons on the Euroblade forward stroke. I have not taken anywhere as many with the Greenland paddle. So I consider myself so much earlier at the stage of learning with the Greenland paddle. What I really do like about the Greenland paddle is, to me, it feels a little more natural. I know that I'm probably not doing everything correctly, and I will continue learning as I work with different mentors. But my body seems to have an easier connection to movement and how to get good forward movement on my kayak when it comes to the Greenland paddle versus the Euroblade. The Euroblade, I feel like I have a better technique because I've just taken more classes and I'm a lot more conscious of what I'm doing. However, sometimes I feel like some of it doesn't really feel as natural, and I'm really thinking about what I'm doing to try to get the most out of it. With the Greenland paddle, maybe I'm doing it all wrong. That's completely okay. I will learn and then fix as I go along. But so as we talk about tips tonight and different things that we can do, just keep in mind that I'm much earlier in my learning phase with the Greenland paddle as I am with the Euroblade. With the Euroblade, I can give a lot more tips. With the Greenland paddle, it feels more natural to me, but I know that I'm probably doing a lot of things wrong, and I just want to continue learning. So if you're an instructor, if you're a mentor, and you're watching with me now, please chime in, help me with any of these ideas, concepts. And sorry, messages coming in, and I'm trying to keep up with everything. So, as I said before, if you're on YouTube, go ahead and type into the chat room so that we can talk live. If you're joining me on Instagram, thank you for joining me. Please feel free to type in, and let's have some questions and answers. Okay, so one of the main areas that I've found and I've learned and I've worked with people to fix it on my own and then also to help others overcome it is the idea of paddling with just your arms versus paddling with your entire body. I highly recommend check out on YouTube or anywhere else, or just look up videos online of Olympic paddlers. Hello from Morocco. Thank you for joining me. If you have any questions, please feel free to type in. Let's discuss. Watch some of those high level paddlers, because those guys and gals are so fine-tuned to get the most efficient stroke, because they're competing. They need to be very quick, they need to be efficient and not waste any energy, and they need to sometimes paddle for long distances, or they need lots of speed. So they really want to be as perfect in their form as possible. What you will see is that they use their entire body. They do not use just this. One of the first things that we do when we get out on the water is we grab a paddle, and then we just do this with our hands. And there's nothing wrong with it. We don't know any better. Hello from Australia. All right, so Philip, it must be, depending on where you are in Australia, I'm guessing it's 9 o'clock here. I'm guessing it's around 10:30, 11 for you. Thank you for joining me in the morning. You're talking to us from the future. Okay, so the first thing most people do is they start paddling with their hands because they don't know any better, and it's all right. But one of the first things you learn when you start paddling is that, one, there is a thing called the paddler's box, and that is when you take a paddle, you put it out in front of you, you put your hands in the right position on the paddle, and what's happening in the paddler's box is you're supposed to have a nice, strong position of your body, and if you're just doing this, all you're doing is just moving your arm muscles. You don't want to do that because that's nowhere as strong as using the entire rest of your body. Your legs are super strong, so why not put those into the equation? Same thing with your core. Just your entire body should really be involved when it comes to a good forward stroke. So that means, this is also really interesting, some mentors are all about core rotation. So what they think is that you need to really slide from side to side, rotate from side to side. You should really see the body turning from side to side with every stroke. And then there's some other instructors and mentors that feel like as long as your blade really makes it to the other side for the next stroke, and you're doing so without moving your arms, that's enough rotation. So I found it very interesting that how it varies from instructor to instructor, but what everybody holds and says is that, one, you should not paddle with your arms, you should paddle with the rest of your body. Two, you should have some kind of rotation as you do it. So if you do it with your legs, that already is a big part of something that can help you in the rotation. So the idea is your arms stay in a nice strong paddler's box, and then with the rest of your body, you take your strokes. Amen. Your leg and back muscles are way stronger than arm muscles. That allows for a stronger stroke. Julian, you are completely right. That is, in essence, what it is. But it's not only your legs, it's your entire body altogether. The other thing is, with a strong paddler's box, you're also, your arms are strong muscles, but your arms are only really keeping the paddle in place. But it is your body and your legs that are giving you that propulsion when you're taking your stroke. With less effort and risk of injury, said Hi 5V. So I think that's Hive. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Say hi to my son Oakley, please. I will, Energy Handyman. Hello, Oakley. Thank you for tuning in, High Energy Energy Man. That's one of the tough things about doing these things is everybody uses handles, and we don't really use our names. So then, when I meet people in person in real life, it's very hard to not say talk about their handles rather, and then try to associate it with names because you get used to the handles for so long. But anyway, yes, getting back to that, the idea is keep that strong paddler's box, and then use your legs and use your body to get a nice strong stroke as you rotate from side to side. Once again, that's just a tip. If you can, go out and work with someone so that they can give you advice real time of what you're doing, and then exercises to make that better. But paddling with your entire body, using your legs is huge. And that's another part why we say always make sure your foot plate, either your foot plate or your foot pegs are in a good position so you're comfortable, but you can put pressure because you want to be able to move. Another thing that's really important, as we're also talking about using your body, is being able to rotate within your seat. Sometimes people are just stuck in their seat. Make sure you can move around, because if you notice surf ski paddlers and Olympic paddlers, they're really moving around. Hello, Gretzky. Thank you for joining me. Yes, we're talking about the forward stroke, and we're talking about using your entire body and not just our arms. And actually, if you don't have someone to work with, I recommend, if you have any kind of camera, even just your phone, put it over on the side on the shore, somewhere nearby, paddle in front a couple of times, paddle to and away from the camera. Watch your technique. Look at what you're doing, because a lot of times you're thinking, and this happens to me all the time, especially when I use my drone. I'll go out, I'll get the drone up, I'll paddle past the drone, and then I look at my technique and I'm thinking, what the hell was I doing? There's like zero rotation there. I'm not using my legs. You could see it from away. But when you're doing it, you're thinking, oh, this is perfect. I'm really getting some really good motion here. But then when you look in the camera, you don't really see it as much. So the camera is a really good tool to learn all these things. But it's even better to work with someone else that can spot you and tell you what you're doing right, what you're doing wrong. And if you work with a mentor or an instructor, they can also even give you tips and exercises which you can continue doing years down the line. Okay. So, this is a small tip, but I've noticed it very much, especially with newbies or people that are just getting into kayaking, and that is, usually we're stronger on one side than the other. I'm a righty, so therefore I'm used to having a strong right side. I've noticed it in the few times I've guided tours with people that had never paddled before, where they were having a hard time keeping their kayak going straight. And they were in sea kayaks. But I know all the things that could be. Maybe there was a little bit of wind, so they needed the skeg down. No, but what I did notice was that they were always veering to one side. And it came down to they're stronger on one side. This is the first time they're paddling. You got to keep that in mind, that one side will probably try to pull a little bit harder. And what happens if on every stroke you're pulling harder on one side? High voltage climber, what angle do you set your paddle and why? That's an excellent question. Let me write that down and we will come back to it. What angle? So I'm guessing you're talking about feathering, correct? Not high angle versus low angle paddler. Okay, so one thing to look out for then is hi from Argentina. Hello. 60 degrees for me. So Gretzky likes paddling with 60 degrees. That is impressive. Most paddlers I know that like feathering will usually be around the 30, 45 degrees. A lot of times paddlers that learned a long time ago used to paddle with more feathering. Some people really feel like having the right feathering also helps with your body position when you take that stroke, meaning, so, I'll use actually a Euro blade. As you go for your stroke, if you have a feathered paddle, when you're set up for the next stroke, depending on the technique people use, sometimes that paddle is in the right position to enter the water and then already be perpendicular to the motion you're going in, so you get instant power. If you have a 0 degree feather, sometimes you would need to then turn your hand slightly so that the paddle's in the right position. Now, I think that all comes down to preference and then to the way people paddle. I paddle with 0 degrees, and I'm happy with that. To me, the technique just works. I don't have to turn too much, and the paddle just works. But I have heard that some people feel that by having 30, 45 degrees, it's in the right position if your wrists are neutral to then be able to go into the water and be in the right position and be able to get the right angle of the blade into the water so that it's perpendicular to your kayak, and then you get the force right there. Yes, Grexy is saying as well, depending on the paddle and technique. So I think it just comes down to the way you like to paddle. I like 0 degrees. I don't have a problem with that. And then the Greenland paddle is always at 0 degrees, so I'm just used to that. But I do see others that paddle with 35, 45, 60 degrees, and they really like paddling that way. Their technique is spotless, and it works for them. I think it's preference, and it comes down to what you like to paddle. There's also, I have switched for 0 degrees first time this year. Excellent. And some other people saying 0 degrees. So yeah, I think it just comes down to preference and what you're doing. And then Jay is also saying that he feathers his paddle depending on the wind. Now that is a very interesting topic of conversation, because you're going to have a split where some people think it's absolutely right and some people think it's absolutely crap. And it's hilarious to watch people argue over this. It is true that on really high windy days, if you have a 0 feather on your paddle, you're going to be pushing into the wind, into headwind all the time. So if you do have feather, it'll be a little easier to get through the wind. However, there are others that think that if you change your technique slightly, it won't affect you. So I'm not going to get into that. I just like 0, and then the other thing actually that Jay just said is that he now uses the Greenland paddle on windy days. That is exactly what I do. Anytime it's windy, I love going for my Greenland paddle, because not only can you do, not only is the Greenland paddle not really affected anywhere as much by wind, but you can do an extended stroke, which what it does is, okay, so I'm paddling, right? I have a full paddle. With an extended stroke, if I'm going to go take this stroke, I plant the entire blade into the water, and then look at how much is left up top. So if I do an extended stroke in really high wind, then I have absolutely nothing going into the wind. So that's really helpful. I know there's been a flurry of questions, so let's go back. What about, Hive asked, what about bent shaft versus straight shaft? All right, there we go. Firmly, floating speed bump. Firmly in the 45-degree camp, larger paddles getting blown away in wind is no fun. Exactly. So, but I do think it comes to preference. Some people in their technique maybe low angle paddling or whatever. And you're right, bigger paddles, absolutely, you're going to feel the wind a lot more. So, but for me, I'm almost always using a Greenland paddle, and in the wind, they're fantastic. If it's windy or bad weather, use your storm paddle. See, so that's really interesting too. I heard this story it was during one of the Kayak USA events where they had some guests from Greenland, and they asked, I think it was at a festival, but they asked, so they were asking questions about the storm paddle, and they were a little taken back by the question. They said, "Wait, what do you mean? So what's your storm paddle technique like?" And they said, "Well, if it's really that windy and that rainy, why would you go in the water?" And I thought that was a really interesting anecdote, because it was more about, well, if it's just really, like, you, in a lot of those cases, you paddle to hunt. If conditions are just that bad, why would you paddle? But for us, it's sport, it's a hobby, it's something we do outdoors. And so that was interesting. So this actually is my storm paddle, which I like using when it is like that, but I do like doing an extended stroke whenever it's very windy. Let's see, agreed, but you can learn technique around feathering. Hard to learn your way around gusting wind. Definitely trade-offs. Floating speed bumps out. Absolutely, and here's, actually, I'm going to add this into the tips of the day. Let's discuss for a second. It's really a good idea for you to practice paddling with different levels of feathering. And what I mean is, and this is one of the things that I really like doing, when I'm paddling with friends and people always want to mix around and switch paddles just to try different things. Anytime someone gives me a Euroblade and it's feathered, I try to paddle with that. Doesn't matter if it's led by a right or left hand. Doesn't matter what feathering they have. Just close your eyes. Well, not really close your eyes, but just feel it and see if you can paddle with whatever feathering other people have. Because, especially if you want to become a very good paddler, it's more about the feeling in the water and seeing how your paddle's reacting to it, rather than, oh, I'm only used to 45 degrees and it has to be right hand led. Because then, what if your paddle breaks and your friend or your extra paddle is only at 0 degrees? Are you going to be uncomfortable paddling the rest of the time? No. So it's really great to, once in a while, change things around, see what it's like, paddle with it. Try, something that's really good to do is try low braces and high braces with different feathering on your paddle. Same thing with rolls. Get used to the idea that you need to see where those blades are. Once again, one of the reasons I like the Greenland paddle is I never have to think about that because I know exactly where the blade is at all times. I'm cheating, but I also really like the Greenland paddle. But it's just really good practice to just, if someone gives you a paddle, grab it and paddle with it without changing anything on it. Just get used to it. Totally agree. You have to learn how to paddle besides the paddle you're using. Exactly. And the same thing goes with longer paddles, shorter paddles. I know that there's an optimum length for your size and there's an optimum size of the blade for your size and you like your paddle. But if for some reason that one blows away or it breaks or whatever and you need to use someone else's, no big deal. Okay. If you have a tailwind, your paddle will act as a sail with 0 degrees. Yes, that's also very useful, but most of the time I'm using my Greenland paddle, so it doesn't affect me as much. But yes, you can use, if you're going downwind, your paddle as a sail, and that way it gives you a little bit more of a boost. Try paddling on just one side while trying to go straight. Okay, so let's get back to the idea that I was talking about, which is trying to remain even with your power on either side. So, hold on, there's a whole bunch of messages. Let me see if that goes back to. Someone asked a question about the bench shafts. It's a great paddle on very long trips for the variations of hand placement. Okay? And I think that there's a lot of dogma around traditional paddling, which can be fun, but is not so based in reality. As for why paddle in high wind? Because it's fun. Right. It's fun for us in dry suits and in nice weather. And by the way, that was Chris and Bustix saying that stuff in the question. In the unsafe water paddling talked about paddling on just one side. Yes, I totally agree, and it's really fun to paddle in high winds. But what really gets me, and one of the reasons I really love traditional paddling, is to think that imagine you're in frigid water. Being out of the kayak means death. And you not going paddling means your family doesn't eat. That's just a really weird way to look at it. But that's where it comes from, right? So a lot of times I try to think of all this stuff we talk about and put it in terms of, well, you need to hunt. And to hunt, you need to be efficient. And to be efficient and to be silent, actually, and that will tie into a lot of the other tips I'm talking about. But Jay said, yeah, it is. Paddling in high winds. Absolutely. You guys are called Small Craft Advisory for a reason. Okay, so being even on both sides. Good hand position. So, number one, keeping your hands in the right position on the paddle is very important. Keep it even on either side. And when you are taking your strokes, keep an eye, feel it out. See if you're really putting the same amount of power on both sides. And Unsafe Waters Paddling said, try paddling on just one side while trying to go straight. That is a really good idea to do, and the same goes with alternating strokes and just seeing how much your kayak is actually shifting from side to side and trying to minimize that shifting. So try to get the most out of your forward motion rather than getting that kind of rotation on your kayak. I understand some kayaks are longer than others, but if you really pay attention to technique, you want to try to exchange your movement for forward motion as much as possible. So if you can watch your kayak and see if it rotates the least amount and you're really getting the most out of it, that'll be great. Let's talk about, actually for a second, I don't have it here. Let's talk about bent shafts versus straight shafts. That's another area that I think it comes down to preference. I know a lot of people that love straight shafts. I know a lot of people that love bent shafts. Bent shafts allow you to know exactly where your hands are on the paddle. They are also supposed to be much better for your wrists because of the positioning, so that when you go to take your stroke, you're not moving your wrists as much. But I think that also comes down to preference, because not everybody's body is made the same way. So someone that's taller and thinks they need a certain size paddle versus someone that's shorter and then gets the same paddle without knowing, all of a sudden maybe that bent shaft is not the best idea for you. So I'd say if you get the chance, before you get yourself a bent shaft paddle, try to see if a buddy has one. Paddle with it, and I don't mean for 5 minutes. Paddle it for a day, 2, 3, if you can, because then you'll really get to see. One of the ways I know if I want to switch paddles or not, or if one, is the way I feel when I get home. So for a very long time, my blade has been a Warner, when it comes to Euroblade, has been a Warner Icarus, right? It's a huge, huge blade. It displaces so much water. And in the beginning, I would come home and I'd be really tired after a full day out of water. And actually, I'm going to tie this story into another anecdote, into another tip, really. And then eventually I moved down to Greenland paddles, and then eventually I realized I like smaller blades. By the end of the day, I would get home and I wouldn't be anywhere as tired as I was using my huge blade. And now I use the equivalent. I use a Mitchell blade if I paddle with a Euroblade, and it's the size of the Warner Cypress, so that's much smaller. And so the last tip for the day, which I'm going to switch and bring it up right now, is that a good paddle goes a long way. And what I mean by this is the first paddle I've had, the first paddle we got was a really cheap one from Dick's. It was 30 bucks. Wait, hold on. Someone asked a question about bent shafts. It's a great paddle and they're, oh, okay. No, we already had covered that question. Did I miss any? Nope, we're good here. And as I was saying before, if you're joining me on YouTube or Instagram, you can type in questions and we can continue this conversation live, unless eventually this gets put on YouTube and then it's not live anymore, but still, it's great to have this discussion. So we had $30 paddles from Dick's, and they're metal, they're heavy, the blades are made out of plastic, and they're fantastic for paddling out on the day. You're out on the lake, you're having fun. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with cheap blades. But if you want to cover more distance, you want something lighter. You're taking thousands of strokes, and trust me, if you have a lighter blade in your hand, you will cover more distance, you won't get as tired, and you're going to have a better time on the water. That doesn't mean you need to spend a lot of money. So what I like saying a lot is a lot of the equipment I've gotten used from other mentors, from other instructors, from other paddlers. Paddlers, most of us are gearheads. We love gear, we love talking about gear, we're always looking for something new, we're looking for new deals. And one of the things we do is that means we need to sell lots of stuff, usually. Some of us, Felix, will have 7, 8 kayaks because they can't make up their minds to sell some. So, same goes with gear. For me, several other mentors I've worked with, we were taking lessons from uh, uh, we were taking lessons from. Hold on. When were we taking- So we were taking lessons for. It was during the winter. We had taken some rolling classes and we had taken some other classes, and Dave McPherson and Drew were the instructors at that time. Drew is around 6 feet tall, but a really big guy, and Dave is a little bit shorter. So they were both selling their really nice um, Werner carbon paddles, and we wound up buying them from them for, I think it was half price, maybe a little bit less. They had them for like I think a year or two, and then every couple of years they would renew their equipment, and then they would sell off their equipment, and they were in fantastic shape. And this one I think I've had, it's been 4 or 5 years. I don't know how long we've had this, and it's still in fantastic shape. Same thing goes for my wife's Cypress. We got them from other instructors, and the same goes with a lot of the other gear. Look for used gear. If you spend, it doesn't have to be new. Some of these paddles are ridiculously expensive, but if you look for older used equipment, you can get some amazing deals on really fantastic gear. And that paddle is so light compared to what we had. We had our old Dick's paddles, which were super heavy, and then we had absolutely fantastic paddles. And I can't even start to tell you just how much further we paddled, how much more fun we were having, because it was just so much easier to paddle with a good paddle. So it's not about how expensive the paddle is, you can find them used. It's about having a light paddle. So you can have fiberglass blades, you can have carbon blades, you can have carbon shafts, you can have some paddles are carbon shafts with fiberglass blades to try to be as light as possible, but they're still flexible, and the fiberglass will be more forgiving. Same thing with plastic blades. If you're in whitewater and you know you're going to be rock gardening a lot, or if you're a sea kayak and you know that you're going to be hitting rocks, you probably want something not like carbon that might shatter. I know they're strong, but you don't want to hit those on rocks. So plastic fiberglass is usually the better. But anyway, it's not about price. It's about a good paddle, and you can find them used. So I highly, highly recommend, if you take classes, if you can work with a club, or if there's a paddling club near you, keep an eye on their gear. They're always selling it. There was a question. Hobie Kite asked, should I make marks on the paddle for my hand position? I would say if you want to, if that will help you, absolutely. I know several people that like having marks on their paddles, and that way it makes it easy. But you should eventually get used to just understanding where that hand position should be, eventually just muscle memory. So if it helps you at first, do it, and then eventually get rid of them, and then see if you can keep that. It's always good to keep good hand positioning, not only so that you know where you are on the paddle, but also for efficiency, and so that you don't get hurt either. There's been a couple of comments here. Let's see. Icarus. Yes. That's how I got both my sea kayak and my whitewater boat, my old coach. Exactly. A lot of times kayakers are moving on to other things. When I started kayaking, I wanted something very different out of paddling. I didn't really understand what I was doing. A lot of people buy boats and then they grow into it, but eventually they grow out of it. Or same thing happens with gear. So yes, and someone said, sell gear? That sounds awful. Exactly. Some kayakers can never get rid of their stuff, like several paddlers I know. I love the Cypress. It feels like it does the paddling for you with the beach ball effect they have. I have used 5 boats. I have 5 used boats, sold 2 last year, and then I bought 1 more. See, same thing happened to me. For me, I had 3 different kayaks, slightly at different times, but then I sold all of them in order to be able to afford my rock pool. I know certain people that continue to buy boats and they don't sell their old ones. I don't know how they pull it off, but it's very funny to watch, because sometimes they think, uh-oh, my wife is going to make me sleep outside because I bought another new kayak. Buying used from friends, mentors usually gives you the opportunity to test the gear before buying it, and that's a plus. Yes, Julian Veron said. And not only do I agree with that, I'll go a little bit further, but if you buy gear from mentors and instructors, not only do you get to test it, but they'll tell you why they liked it and what the positives are, so that you're not just going down to Walmart and buying a kayak from Dick's. No one there knows anything about why you should get that and you shouldn't. But an instructor that has outgrown a piece of gear can tell you this paddle is excellent because of this, 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 and that. And this is why it might be good for you. And not only is it cheap for you to get, but you'll know exactly why you should get it. So it's always a really nice cycle, and the gear gets recycled within our community. So good gear will be very helpful in having a good forward stroke. It's not about money, but it does. A light paddle will also help you have better technique because, for example, if you're supposed to hold the paddler's box out here all day long as you're going through your stuff, a lighter paddle is a lot easier to hold out here. A heavier paddle, you might have to change your technique because you're so tired. So just one thing to think about. Hi Luke, Jonas from Sweden here. A good paddle can last several kayaks. My experience is to get a blade you love and keep it a long time. I completely, Red Sam, I completely agree. It's also interesting because I've changed blades several times as my paddling changed over the years. But I still have all of my paddles. I've gone through kayaks, but I haven't gotten rid of any of my paddles because I like going back to them. Buy low, sell high. Werner Icarus, my fave. Multi-cam camper. Great gear, always has a great lifespan. Absolutely, I agree. But once again, that doesn't mean it has to be new. Like I said, this Icarus I have, I've had it for many years, and my mentor before me also had it. One thing I wanted to mention, as you're buying old equipment, and I'm going to tie it in. The mentor that I bought this from, his name is Drew, and he's around, I'd say, 6'2", 6'3", really big guy. Much heavier than I am because he's a big guy and I'm super skinny. And he had the Icarus. And we have similar wingspan, but body type completely different. And I didn't know better, but I tried the blade. It was awesome. I was good to go. But for the type of paddling I do, this was the wrong blade for me. It's just a little big. And so I'd come home after a long paddle and I'd be exhausted. I'd be sore. When I moved down to a different blade, I realized I could go further. Yes, I'm not getting that ridiculous, explosive amount of oomph on every stroke, but all of a sudden I could paddle further and I could paddle a little bit faster because I was just taking more strokes and I was not as tired. So one thing to think about, especially if you're buying old gear, see if you can test it first. Or if you can't test it, if you have a buddy that has the same one, see if you can use theirs for a while, because it's awesome to really see if it's right for your body. Just because someone is selling it doesn't mean it's perfect for you. So that's another thing to think about. I might sneeze in a second. So if you're joining me on YouTube, go ahead and type into the live chat box below and we can continue a conversation. Same thing goes for Instagram. Once again, thank you for being with me. I'm going to continue trying to do this every Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. I know that it doesn't work for everybody because everyone is in a different time zone, but it works for me because of my family and the baby going to sleep, so I'm going to continue trying to do it at this time. What's great is after this is done, YouTube archives it and then puts it up so that anybody that is not able to be here with us live can watch it later. And what I really would love is for you to then add comments afterwards, because I'd love more topics or further discussions on this. We could always pick up on the next one and discuss it. I'm always looking at comments, so I'm more than happy to discuss it. And I know that a lot of times other instructors that chime in while we're doing this, other mentors, other paddlers, they'll also chime in during comments. So things that I cannot answer, a lot of times we'll have other people that can answer. Buying from friends, mentors also gives you an idea of how well the gear has been taken care of. That is completely right. Floating speed bump set. I completely agree. Certain people are very meticulous about their gear, others are not. I would say if you had a choice, buy from someone that takes really good care of your equipment. I found that there's a perfect balance between boat and paddle. I mean, some boats require different paddles, different paddling styles to get the best performance out of them. Said multi-cam camper. And my mom loves me. I just found out on Instagram. I believe my mom and dad are watching this, and indeed, my mom loves me, which she should because it was Mother's Day here in the U.S. yesterday, and I was with her, and it was very nice. So, yes, I agree that certain boats work really well with certain paddles. For example, you don't want to have a high-angle paddle. That means it's on the shorter side with big blades on a kayak that's very wide. On a kayak that's wider, you probably want a longer paddle so that you know that it's in the water at a low angle. Now, if you're in a surf ski or a kayak that happens to be very narrow, then you could have a shorter blade, a shorter shaft, and then you can go for a very high angle as you take your strokes. So that's another thing to think about. If someone is selling a paddle and you just happen to have the wrong boat, don't just get it because it's a good paddle. Okay, so let's talk about another topic: wasted energy. I love this one. I think it's really important because a lot of times people think that they're getting a lot out of their stroke, and it turns out they're just wasting lots of energy. Oh, Benjamin said, if you can't buy one, make one. Yes, especially when it comes to a Greenland paddle. I highly urge people to make their own paddles. People always ask me, so Gear Lab paddles, I really want to get one. And I ask first, have you ever tried a Greenland paddle? Don't just spend lots of money if you don't know if you even like a Greenland paddle overall. And as Benjamin said, if you can, make a paddle first. Try it out. See if you like it. I know lots of people make their own paddles, and then eventually they either sell them, they give them away to friends, or you can get lots of paddles that way too. So if you can, make one. That's always a really great exercise. Greenland Paddlers Forward Stroke Survey. Canting the blade. Do you keep the canted angle consistent through the stroke, or does it vary for you from catch to release? So Chris asked that question, and I'm going to tie it into wasted energy. So first I'll go through wasted energy, and then let's go through Greenland paddle canted edges. If you see bubbles when you're taking a stroke, you're pulling too hard on the blade. If you hear noise, you're pulling too hard on the blade. So anything you do that gives you that kind of feedback, that's just wasted energy. Your energy from your stroke is going into making bubbles, it's going into making noise, it's going into fluttering, it's going into lots of different places. The way you should think about the forward stroke, and just any stroke really in general, is you plant the blade into the water. You want to put the right amount of energy into the blade so that you move your kayak, but the blade does not move when it's in the water. The idea is the blade goes into the water and it stays stationary in that location. If you pull too hard, it'll flutter, it'll cause bubbles, it'll make noise. That's wasted energy. So silent going in. It does not move as you take your stroke. Silent coming out. That's the wrong technique. I just have a table here so I can't actually take a stroke. But silent going in. It does not move through the water. You are moving forward. The blade stays in place, and then in the right time comes out of the water silently. Okay? So don't waste energy. If you see a lot of mess and turbulence going on around your paddle, you're pulling too hard. Here we go. Do you have any recommendations on a walkthrough on how to make a Greenland paddle? Well, Benjamin that just talked about that, he is all about making paddles, and you should definitely check out his feed. His handle is Benjamin Fontenot. But I would recommend the kayakusa.org website. That's with a Q and a J. QAJAQ USA.org. They have not only great instructions on how to make the paddles, but also their forum is fantastic. Lots of people that know tons and tons and tons, and they're very helpful as you're putting stuff together. That's where I talked to tons of people when it came to when I was building my skin on frame. Um, any kind of turbulence is wasted energy. It's a fluid dynamics thing. Yes, exactly. Um, So I love how my Warner paddle pops out of the water seamlessly with no effort. You are correct about the silent part, says Multicam Camper. Look for a good paddle builder. Looking for a good paddle builder is like a great instructor. You can find great builders and classes on building them. Absolutely, Eastek said. So, wasted energy. That also goes with how are you using your blade through your stroke? Meaning, when you're putting it in, is it perpendicular to the direction you want to go into? Are you going way out into the side and pulling it around? Are you pulling up on the blade? One of the things that I learned recently, and I mean, I've been working on this for a while, but it was very interesting to think about the angle and what your other hand is doing at the end of the stroke, in that, look at how the blade comes out of the water. Does it come out at an angle? Does it come out straight? Where is it coming out so that you are not essentially pulling water up? Meaning, you go through and then you're pulling, and you pull the blade when it's flat, and you're actually pulling and pulling water out with it. Are you pulling it seamlessly out of the water? These are all things that could really help. Same thing as, are you doing more of a sweep stroke than a forward stroke? Sorry, see, that is incorrect. This is not a forward stroke. I'm using my arm. This is a forward stroke. However, is it a sweep or is it a forward stroke where I'm using the main part of the stroke to go forward, and then anything else over here is just wasted energy? Because if you look at the way the blade is, once it gets back here, I'm really just pulling into the kayak. I'm not pulling forward. So, and a lot of people would actually jump on me for saying pulling, because really you shouldn't be pulling, because if you're pulling, you're using your hand. So it's more of keeping your hand steady and using the rest of your body for it. So think about where your blade is as it goes in the water, goes through the water, comes out of the water. What is it doing in that entire time so that you are getting the most out of going forward and not turning the kayak in any way, not moving the kayak up and down? This is something that in my latest class with John, I was doing incorrectly, where I was trying to catch a wave, and in order to get even more out of my stroke, I was doing, have you guys seen that technique when you start where you plant the blade and you lean forward, you plant the blade, and not only do you do your technique, but you also pull with your entire body. What I was doing is I was making the kayak bounce. And by making it bounce, I was wasting energy and the bow was digging. So I was making it harder for myself to gain speed, instead of just keeping the kayak as straight as I could and then just taking nice, clean forward strokes to get speed. So think about the blade, think about how you're using it, don't waste energy. And now let's talk about Chris's thought, especially from Greenland paddlers, canting the blade. I've read and I've been told that canting the blade gives you a little bit more of an advantage as you go through your stroke. I've also heard from other people that they believe that that doesn't actually help. But I don't know enough. I am trying to canting it forward and see if I can go through the entire stroke. And what I did find is, and some people will do this as well, and when I go to the end of my stroke, I think about the blade, and if I have it canted forward and I pull it straight up, let me look at the camera. If I have it, this is straight vertically, this is canted forward, so that top blade is slightly forward. At the end of my stroke, if I now pull quickly straight up, I'll do it here for Instagram. If I pull straight up this way, I'm actually getting a little bit of motion which will push the blade forward. Well, no, the blade will not push forward, but it has a climbing angle as it goes out of the water, and it will give me a little bit of a boost going forward. I'll do it for YouTube. Blade, there we go. Canter forward as I pull up. Same thing, airplane wing. Pulling, sorry, it is going to propel me forward because it's a climbing angle on the motion I'm making. So, one of the things that I've been in discussions with some mentors is, do you get that little bit of a flick at the end that also gives you a little bit of extra oomph at the end of every stroke? But others really feel like at the end of the stroke, you should pull the blade directly vertically, not waste energy doing that. Instead of pulling down, only use your energy going forward. So that's a very interesting, I think, area of a topic to discuss. Chris, I would love to hear what you think about that. There were a couple of bobbing. Yes, that's what I was doing. Right, and that's exactly what I was doing. Paddling is like racing. Aggressive is slow, smooth is fast. Exactly. Multicam camper said. Slow and succinct and careful movements will actually be a lot faster. And being careful about what you're doing and trying to use as delicate and proper, not delicate, but as proper technique as possible, you will use the least amount of effort for the most reward in what you're trying to do. Falling Speed Bump says, the other benefit of canting a Greenland blade is that it forces the water to flow over one edge of the paddle, which makes it impossible for the blade to flutter. Very interesting. Okay. I've never actually had a problem with fluttering, but that's very interesting that that's where it comes from. Because I was also, I think I read, and I was told that some people feel that by canting the edge as well, you're getting a little bit of extra lift the way a wing paddle does, so using the Bernoulli effect, the Bernoulli principle really, which is pressure on one side being lower because it's going over more distance than on the other side, which is how an airplane wing works. But then I was talking to someone that actually was building Greenland paddles in a different way, and he was adamant about saying that he doesn't think that's the case unless the two sides are different, which Aleutian paddles are different, so maybe that's part of it too. So all of this is really, really interesting. I have, let me see. Oh, I've gone through all of my toppings. All of my pizza toppings. I've gone through all of my pizza toppings. No, we've covered all of the topics that I was thinking of covering. So let's just maybe finish out the conversation. This discussion was awesome. It's been a freaking hour. I can't believe that it went by that quickly. But Instagram only allows you to stream for an hour, so this is going to be ending soon. But YouTube, same thing. We have about 2-3 minutes. So if you have any last questions or anything else you want to discuss before we end the session, thank you so much for joining me. I think there's another question. With an Euroblade paddle, how do you know if the blade area is too small or too large? Mine was too large, and I could tell that my body was feeling it. I was always tired. I was always sore after paddling. When I moved down to a different paddle, I noticed that my braces were not as efficient, but I learned to use that to my advantage, and I liked a slightly smaller blade. I would say talk to anybody else that's either an instructor, mentor, or just a paddler that has paddled for a long time and see if they can help you pick out the right size of blade. There's also nothing wrong with a blade that's big and small. Gracias por la buena onda de siempre. Gracias por estar conmigo. Nos vemos la semana que viene. So what I'm saying is, if you're going to go surfing, there's absolutely nothing wrong with having a big blade so you get massive amounts of power on every stroke. And then if you're going to be touring for a long time, get a low-angle blade that's very long, like a Kamano by Werner. Or same thing goes with Greenland paddles versus Euroblades. You use each thing for different things. Thank you for another great episode. I have a lot to work on. Awesome. Thank you, Outdoor Kiss. Thank you for joining me. Chris says, my own technique is pretty sloppy, but at the catch I have less cant, blade is more perpendicular, and it gets more canted as the stroke progresses. It stays canted at the exit, or so I think. Not sure what is the best method, but it's where I am now, and always have huge room for growth. And thanks for the chat. Thank you, Chris, for being here with me. I always appreciate your input. Jay, thank you as well for being with me and for your input as always. Yes, same thing happens with me. I am very early in my stage of learning. I like sharing what I know so far, and I love hearing what other people have to say. And I realize the more classes I take and the more times I go out with other paddlers that know more than I do, just how important and how much I learn from them. So thank you for joining me. I hope this session was helpful. I'm going to continue trying to do these every Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. If you have any topics you want to discuss, please send me an email, comment below, send me a message. Anyway, you can reach out to me on any of the channels. I'm always happy to know what you guys are working on. I always share what I'm working on, and I love having these discussions. And I continue to tell you guys when I use information and tips that I've gathered from these episodes as well, which have been awesome for me. So I'm being very selfish. I'm enjoying these, and hopefully they help others as well. So hopefully I will see you next Monday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. As always, Luke Gomer, Kayak Hipster. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.